You're listening to the Unfixed podcast.
That was one of the healthiest things that I could do, is just be okay with not being okay and giving myself the space to be upset and mad and angry and all of the things. And then once I was able to let that out in healthy and sometimes not the most healthy ways, just to be okay with the fact that it's a process. And then I was able to say, okay, I'm ready to accept this. I'm ready to talk about how this affects my anxiety and how I have medical PTSD and how, I am ready to live life again, even though it's going to look different than what I thought it would.
Hi, everyone. This is the Unfixed podcast, and I'm your host, Martel Catalano. The chronic illness community often talks to each other, but in this show, we open the dialogue, exploring adversity through different walks of life to recognize our shared humanness. These intimate conversations are between people who are creatively contending with diverse challenges. One person has a chronic health condition because they're often experts in facing the hard stuff. The other is a professional working within a relevant field or facing their own unique battle. Each episode is an invitation to lean into curiosity and compassion while recognizing that we can live powerful lives despite, or sometimes because of, our circumstances. This podcast is part of a suite of resources provided by Beyond My Battle. If you feel inclined to support the show, you can do so at beyondmybattle.org/donate. That quote we opened with was from Brianna Cardenas. She's a subject in the Unfixed docuseries and film. Brianna is a physician assistant, certified athletic trainer, and professor specializing in chronic pain management. She has almost a decade of patient care experience and a lifetime of experience with chronic pain herself. She has a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which caused her to develop craniocervical instability, a spinal CSF leak, and dysautonomia. All of these are considered mysterious, rare diseases, and she had to fight hard to get even a diagnosis, let alone treatment. She is grateful to have a better quality of life now since making health a priority. Her mission as a PA, professor, and patient advocate is to help others find some relief from chronic illness, and she believes education is the key to becoming more empowered in our journeys. We're excited today for Brianna to share a conversation with another powerful woman who is navigating her own harrowing medical journey and has just published a memoir and guide for other women suffering from mysterious health conditions. Sarah Ramey is a writer and musician known as Wolf Larson, living between Washington, D.C. and Tucson, Arizona. She received an MFA in creative nonfiction writing from Columbia University in 2007 and worked on President Obama's 2008 campaign. Sarah is the recipient of a 2018 Whiting Grant for nonfiction and has been featured in the Paris Review, Miss Magazine, Salon, The Washington Post, Refinery 29, Lit Hub, and The Washingtonian. Her memoir, The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness, was a starred selection for Publishers Weekly, Kirkus Reviews, Booklist, and was chosen as one of the best books of 2020 by Bookpage. Sarah has been living with serious chronic pain and illness for 17 years, and The Lady's Handbook for Her Mysterious Illness is her first book that recollects her battle with illness that doctors hinted was all in her head but wasn't. Together, these two incredible women are here with us today to share an engaging conversation about their own health journeys living with mysterious chronic illnesses. Sarah and Brianna, I am so delighted to introduce you two to each other.
Thank you. Yes, it's really exciting to be here.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited for this.
We're really excited to have you both here. I've read so much about you each, and I'm delighted to speak to you both. Upon doing a little of my own research, like I said, the numbers of illnesses that qualify as mysterious is really staggering. Lyme, Epstein-Barr, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, IBS, fibromyalgia, POTS, chronic fatigue, autoimmune, the list goes on. And this is a really big question, I know, but looking back, What were the major barriers for you each in getting a proper diagnosis and proper care?
I guess I can start. I would say there's a lot of things, and I would say first and foremost, being a female and being young. Those seem to be the standout ones because I cannot tell you how many physicians, including people that were my colleagues, when I was at work every day, saying, "Man, like we've got these symptoms going on that really are concerning." They're just like, "Oh, maybe it's your period," or "Oh, maybe you're just stressed." And I remember sincerely believing that, because if you hear those things enough and you're gaslit enough, you begin to believe that that's the truth. And so I would say just the bias and the conditioning from not just my colleagues, based on the fact that I was young, I was a female, in some cases, due to the fact that I am Latinx. I remember one of my bosses jokingly saying, when I told him, "Hey, I'm like having these symptoms and stopped menstruating and I've gained weight and something's wrong, like hormonally." He was like, "Are you sure you're not pregnant? Because usually when pretty Latin girls get these symptoms, it's because they're pregnant." And I was just like, I don't even have words. I don't even have words to say. And it repeated itself going to the ER, and medics telling like the triage nurse that, "Don't worry about me. I was just a Hispanic panic case." And these types of things are just so prevalent for, women of color, people in the LGBTQ plus community. Like, I think there's just lack of awareness. And I think what we're seeing as a nation right now kind of echoes some of the things that exist in medicine, which is that sometimes people are not willing to acknowledge that they have bias. And even when they're presented with these facts, they are almost unwilling to believe that they could be perpetrators of some of these microaggressions. And it becomes a really difficult barrier, not just, that the patient has to navigate, but then at that point you're navigating the egos of the people that are supposed to care for you. And that's, there's just a myriad of things that contribute.
Yes. I'm like standing up and clapping hallelujah as you're speaking. You're 100% correct, of course. And I think that going from what you're saying about there are these blind spots in medicine, particularly when it comes to certain types of illnesses. So if you are a marginalized person and you have your symptoms are invisible, that is like you can't prove to the person that your pain is real, or that your fatigue is real, or that your brain fog is real, or on and on and on down the list, then that sort of overlap, that intersection between already being somebody that they unconsciously are conditioned to not believe and not being able to prove it to them, that immediately shunts you into this category of, hysterical, malingering, liar. And what happens is that there are illnesses that present exactly those ways. They predominantly affect women. The symptoms are predominantly invisible, quote unquote, which only means that we don't have the tools yet to see them. Lots of things are invisible, but then we develop blood tests and we can see them. But as of right now, they're invisible. And so you have this whole group of illnesses: chronic fatigue syndrome, Ehlers-Danlos, POTS, MCAS, on and on and on. We're going to talk about them a lot today. But the mystery illnesses that fall right into that category where you can't prove it as the patient, and they are overwhelmingly affecting mostly women. And that starts to create this stigma in the medical community where if you come to the doctor and, like any other illness, if you came in and started listing off what's wrong with you, they have, they're trained to sort of work like a computer and to take the input and to use those variables and use an algorithm to say, okay, X, Y, and Z, this is what you've got. And when they hear these symptoms, or if you have one of these diagnoses, the algorithm that they're programmed with is programmed to say, aha, I know what this is. This is an unhappy woman in need of an antidepressant, or this is, a woman who's hysterical or is exaggerating or making it up. And so there's this problem in the algorithm itself that's attached to all of these problems. But like you were saying, that seems so clear that that's just an outgrowth of that unacknowledged bias in the medical community.
Yeah, and research shows that on average, women have this higher rate of mysterious illnesses and autoimmune diseases than men. And I think we're getting at like why we think that is. Personally, I guess, why do you think that is? Do you think it's the history of doctors being largely men? Do you think it's the inconvenient truths of just not knowing? And why do you think it's mostly women, I guess?
I think there's a couple of things that contribute to that, at least from the medical perspective. So in addition to some of just like the sociocultural things that we talked about with internalized bias and internalized racism that, even healthcare providers can carry into their practice. I think the way that we train healthcare providers is kind of a relic of how we just educate people in general. Like we treat humans like they're little machines that need to memorize information and regurgitate it. And because our education system is so largely focused on outcomes, a lot of times people are going into medical education thinking, I just need to pass my boards. So that way I can just work and I can go make money and I can support myself and I can pay off my student loans. And it's few and far between that people enter the medical field and leave the medical field with the goal of wanting to help others still intact, or leave their medical education, I should say, with that goal still intact, because medical education and training is brutal. Like I can tell you from experience, the way that we treat our healthcare providers is not sustainable. I remember seeing, 35 patients a day at one point in an 8 to 5 shift and working in urgent cares and seeing 60 something patients in a 12-hour shift with no break. And it's dehumanizing to put people in that position and then expect them to be able to be compassionate human beings, for the ongoing part of it, because we kind of create this productivity-based assembly line way of getting people in and out of medical school and PA school and nursing school and what have you, any type of medical education. And then that continues, that culture of, okay, just be productive, hurry up, is then, carried into the way that people engage with patients. And so I really feel that not only does that affect the way that healthcare providers are interfacing with patients who are not just the straightforward, like, oh, this is, an ear infection, right? It becomes, kind of a thing where we internalize the shame of, oh, I can't figure this person's condition out as healthcare providers. It creates the shame for the healthcare provider to say like, oh, am I not a good healthcare provider or what have you? And then it's just easier for people that maybe aren't as emotionally intelligent to blame the patient and take that frustration out on the patient. And then the patients feel shamed for being, quote, difficult or being, a difficult patient or being not productive, or shamed for wanting to take time off of work because, I don't know, maybe your body is failing you, right? Or your health is problematic. So just that internalized issue.
There's so many factors there too. Like, what about the fact that men don't report health challenges perhaps at the level that women do? Women, just because of who we are as women, tend to be more expressive and more outward. We're going back to like the fundamentals of being a male versus being a female here. But like there is something to that, I think, about women being more expressive and sharing their challenges, perhaps. And this is all about like the toxic male idea of like, you're not going to be strong if you complain about your health as a guy. But like, is there something there too?
I have a lot of thoughts about this, because I think that I do think that that's true in some cases, but in many, in my opinion, I think that that is largely a myth that is constructed by men that tells us that men are just silently suffering while women, go and seek help for these small, minor things or medium things. And what that implies is that chronic fatigue syndrome is, 80 to 90% female, and it's completely disabling at the severest end of the spectrum. Totally bedridden. You have to be, completely taken care of by a caretaker, as I had to be. And it is not possible to stoically pretend that that is not happening. That is just not true. And the fact is that in all of the groups that I'm in, it's true that men are a smaller proportion of the people that are in there, but they are disproportionately loud in the way that they complain about their health. And so I think that I would love to see like rigorous science on this, or data. But what I think that myth sort of grows out of is that it is true that men, if it's not really bothering them, like if, they have some maybe nagging issues, they don't go to the doctor because they don't want to go through all of that. They don't want to be seen as weak. They don't, all of the things that we associate with that, with sort of men shutting down their ability to get help and to be expressive. That's true. And so then you don't get diagnoses of, heart conditions and really serious things that, women are dragging their husbands to the doctor to get a diagnosis for. But that's really different than being hugely symptomatic and just not saying anything. I think that is not true. I have not seen any evidence of that in my own life or in any of the research that I've done. What I've seen is that when men are really symptomatic, they kick up an enormous fuss about it and are really, really outraged right away when they're treated poorly by the medical system, because it's like a shock. Whereas my experience has been that women like really internalize that. And, when they're treated poorly, just like Brianna was saying before, I did this as well. When the first doctor said to me, like, all those things that you just said to me about your symptoms, I think that you're just unhappy. I was like, I suppose I am unhappy, instead of immediately saying like, well, yeah, I'm unhappy because I'm in severe pain because I can't do any of the things that I was able to do 2 years ago, etc. And my male friends that have these problems, they do push back, or they immediately take to the internet to talk about those injustices at their doctor. So I think that it's when we talk about why we see this more in women, I would like to see this explored, because I think that we do sort of default to that, like, well, women just talk about their health more. And I think that that's perhaps some of it, but that really diminishes how serious the problems that women are dealing with, and sort of asserts that men are sort of stoically getting by and, muscling through it. And I don't think that that's true.
I would agree. And I would also add to that, like, just as the profession of practicing medicine has evolved, like the subjects that we study and publish on are largely white males. So yes. Drugs, for example, or pharmacologic agents, don't affect women in the same way, and they don't affect people of color in the same way. And then when people have, an atypical response, like this pain medicine isn't working for me, rather than the healthcare provider taking a step back and saying, maybe this isn't the right therapy, maybe we need to readdress, the diagnosis or the way that we're going about treating this condition, it's like, oh, this person's just a drug seeker. And so when we don't teach students about the fact that, like, hey, you can't base every single patient that you see and how they react to medicines on a sample of white men in their 40s, like, that doesn't even make sense from like a scientific perspective. But I think we lose sight of the fact that we need to treat people like individuals rather than just based on what's in the literature. Because if you take it one step further, like, what's in the literature is not representative of females, and it's not representative of people of color. And like, essentially the medical model is that we treat the patient as if they're male, and then females are like men with pesky hormones. And it just doesn't even make sense. Like, it's just, we have a long way to go in our understanding of how the female body really truly works. And it's not just, male physiology plus, a uterus and plus female hormones, right? Like, yes. That's literally how medicine is taught to people. And it's really difficult to break that narrative, especially when women's health isn't a priority to foundations that fund this type of research. It's not a priority to medical journals to publish this type of thing because, it doesn't, make it a good read for people. Like, there's really a lot of systemic barriers because people will say, well, the evidence isn't there. And it's like, yeah, because we won't do the research to publish.
We didn't produce the research. Yeah, that's not my fault. That's the medical profession's fault, right?
Exactly.
And it's not on the patient. Just on a personal note for what you were just talking about. So historically, I've been sick for 17 years. And in the beginning, when we were trying to figure it out and I was prescribed a lot of different medications, I was sort of like famously reacting really poorly to all of these medications in ways that were, called paradoxical, or that were just like really outsized reactions to what a quote unquote normal person was like. And it was never presented to me as, well, don't worry. I mean, like we haven't studied young women, like we haven't studied like anything but middle-aged white men. And 2 years ago, so 15 years into this, the very first doctor who ever said that to me, because I came in and I had a really bad reaction to one of the medications she gave me. And I, again, had this, like, gives me shame to even talk about it, but I had internalized that and I was like, I'm sorry. I took the medication. I had a really bad reaction, but, and I was trying to like make space for like, but it's okay. And I'm willing to try. And, I was like apologizing, and she's like, it's fine. She's like, the medications aren't tested on anybody but, middle-aged white men, right? And I was like, I do know that, but I'm surprised that you know that and are saying that to me. And it was so relieving. And I feel like it's so important that this doctor, the very first person that ever said this to me, was a younger woman of color. And I was like, of course it is. It's somebody who understands that the system is not set up for everyone, even though it doesn't acknowledge that, because that's such an ugly thing to acknowledge. And so, yeah, I just when you're talking about that, I was like, it's fine to just say that. It's fine to just say, that's okay. We'll just, let's try half the dose. It's okay. It's not your problem that you're responding to this medication differently than some of my other patients.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it makes me think of like what I wanted to ask you next, which was, what's one thing that could have been helpful to hear from your physician or healthcare team at the time of your like lowest, worst situation? And Sarah, it sounds like just kind of reminding you that the system is not representative of the whole or the reality. But is there anything else? And like, Brianna, what's something that your physician could have told you at the time that would have really helped?
I think if they could have just been honest with me instead of trying to make me feel like I was at fault somehow. Like, the thing that I try to tell my students all the time is that it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I haven't seen this before, but I'm going to try and help you. It's okay to say, I haven't seen this, but I'll look into it. And you know what? Let's work together, right? Like, taking the partnership approach not only helps the patient feel like, oh, okay, like, it's not my fault, or I'm not wrong for having this, myriad of symptoms. It's just something that we don't have answers for yet. Because what's extremely harmful is when healthcare providers claim that they know everything. And if their algorithm doesn't fit with this patient, or vice versa, that it's the patient's fault somehow, or the patient is difficult somehow, or the patient just is, med seeking, or has, a mental health issue. And it amazes me how healthcare providers can forget that like someone can simultaneously have anxiety and a physiological explanation for their symptoms, right? So I think just having honesty from my healthcare providers that they had never seen a patient like me before. I would have rather heard that and say, I'm going to refer you to like a university, like it's called a tertiary care center when you go to some place like, Mayo Clinic or Cedars-Sinai or something like that, where they've got, an inpatient team that can come work you up and so forth. I wish that someone would have just said, I think you need to escalate your level of care. I believe you. Like, what a concept.
Yes.
And I'm going to try to help you. I can't help you, but I'm going to try to find someone that can, right? Like, just literally being honest, like just the basic human courtesy of seeing the humanity and the suffering in another person, and not being insecure in one's own diagnostic abilities or whatever, and just trying to say like, oh, well, it's this patient that's difficult, right? Like, that would have made a world of difference for me.
Yes, I think that it really cannot be said enough or underscored enough how damaging it is to be told over and over, not a couple of times, not 10 times, not 20 times, like hundreds of times by different practitioners or doctors that it's you, that there is something wrong with your personhood, and that's the problem when, as you said, it's that's coming from this sort of like ego fragility syndrome, which is that this inability to say, I don't know, but I believe you, which is, I think, as you were saying before, I do think that takes a certain amount of emotional intelligence and capacity, and it's something that it just doesn't seem to be a part of the training whatsoever. But to my mind, that's like, accepting that, a trial lawyer, they're just not very good at, confrontation. And that's just the way that it is. It's like, no. You can't just push that to the side. Like, of course, that is a key component to your skills as a healthcare provider, is having this emotional abilities, having this emotional intelligence and capacity. That just has to be either part of the self-selection in terms of who goes into the field. And if that's not there, if you haven't self-selected that way, it certainly can't get drummed out of you, and probably needs to be part of the curriculum of how to tolerate not knowing, how to tolerate not projecting your own insecurity back onto the patient and making them feel like there's something terribly wrong with them, because it does harm, which is, of course, like the number one oath that you can't break, and it gets broken all the time. And that, I agree with you, if I could have had just one thing from my doctors, I mean, normally any other patient would be like, the number one thing I would like from medicine is like, treatment and a cure and things like that. But for this cohort of patients, it's like the number one thing that we need is just the most basic humanity to say, I am listening, I believe you, and here's what I can do to at least facilitate, as you said, going to seek treatment from somebody who may be able to help you, instead of essentially poisoning that person against themselves, because that is what happens. And it's terrible, because you carry that with you for forever. I mean, you can learn to start to sort of decondition yourself from believing those terrible things about yourself, but it's quite, I've found that it's difficult. It's sort of like a parasite in your mind, and it's quite difficult to completely eradicate. And I'll just say one last thing, which is that you do see this in alternative medicine too, where if you're not getting better based on like their whatever it is, if it's the law of attraction, if it's mold treatment, if whatever it is, if you don't get better in the thing that they're doing, the same thing happens to you, which is like, oh, you must have attracted this, or like you must be doing something to make this happen to you. And it's just, to me, I just want to like throw a protective barrier around all these patients, just be like, don't listen to any of them, because they're all saying that. But they weren't saying that when you came to them in the first place and they said, aha, I know exactly what's going on here for the low price of $9.97. I can help you for sure, unless it doesn't work, in which case it's your fault.
No, you're 100% right. And I feel like part of the reason why that disproportionately affects women is due to the fact that hearing those types of invalidations when you interact with a person, right? Like those things, like you said, that diminish your personhood, like that's not new for women. Mm-hmm. That's a generational issue. And like when you add intersectionality to that, and like even just the way women are raised, like, we're meant to be seen and not heard, or like do this or you won't get a husband. And like all of these like patriarchal and heteronormative like things that a lot of people are literally brought up with from the time that they're young. Like even just to be able to sit in your own power as a woman and say like, no, like I am worthy of basic human dignity, like is a huge step for most women, even if they're healthy, because we're not raised to, be powerful in many cases, unless we have like very progressive parenting. Like I know that I was raised in a traditional upbringing with, Catholicism like shoved down my throat and being told, I wasn't worth anything unless I had a boyfriend, or if I could keep my man happy. Like those types of things are just like insidious, that like go into our like foundational programming of our mind. And so when we hear these things from physicians, it's not just like, oh my gosh, that's shocking and ridiculous. It's like, oh yes, like that is correct. Like I'm less than a person, you know?
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more about what you said about like the alternative world of medicine and not even medicine, but just like healing, like that quote unquote healing world. But coming back to, the conversation here, I do want to change the conversation just a little bit to talk about like your personal experience with getting the diagnoses that you got, because I've talked to countless people who are searching for diagnoses. We have people a lot of times that come to Be On My Battle, our support groups specifically, who have, they're undiagnosed, they're searching because they might not have a rare disease group that they can go to. And so Be On My Battle is a place where, any disease, any disability kind of convenes to talk about the emotions going on. And in many ways, when the diagnosis does come, I know people feel really vindicated and they feel relieved because now they have somewhat of a path forward. But finding a diagnosis doesn't necessarily mean that all your prayers have been answered, right? Like mysterious illnesses are complex and they often involve a multi-system approach to treatment. So for you each, what has been foundational in helping to mitigate the symptoms of your conditions that really like are largely incurable?
I would say for me, like going through the stages of grief was really, really important. I think that for the longest time, I tried to just like push and push and push, or when I had my diagnosis, deny that I was sick, right? Like just showing up to, PA school or showing up into the workforce and being like, I can do this just like anyone else can. Like, I don't have a disability, right? Like just having that approach to it, like as if it was, some personal character flaw or like just human deficit that I needed to make up for, was like kind of the operating system that I, ran in my day-to-day life for the majority of my 20s until my body just said no. Like when I couldn't stand up anymore, when I couldn't remember my phone number anymore and had like such severe cognitive symptoms that I was, forgetting my anniversary to my husband and things like that, like just when my body just finally quit and I could no longer deny it, I kind of threw myself into this like, oh, well, I'll just think positive. I'll, positive, manifestation my way out of this. And obviously that's not effective. And so I think what's been really helpful is really just giving myself the space to grieve what I thought my life was going to look like, grieve my health, grieve the plans that I had made, and be at a place of acceptance. Like I think grieving that it was going to be really hard to find a healthcare team who took my concerns seriously, be angry, and as my husband puts it, kick rocks about it, right? Like sometimes you just got to get it out and, embrace how sucky it can be at times. And you need to really, or at least in my opinion, I don't want to tell people like how to live their lives, but for me, I think that was one of the healthiest things that I could do, is just be okay with not being okay and giving myself the space to be upset and mad and angry and all of the things. And then once I was able to let that out in healthy and sometimes not the most healthy ways, just to be okay with the fact that it's a process. And then I was able to say, okay, I'm ready to accept this. I'm ready to talk about how this affects my anxiety and how I have medical PTSD and how, I am ready to live life again, even though it's going to look different than what I thought it would. Like, it's just, I think, giving myself the space to go through the process of all of that mentally was extremely helpful. And then I was more willing to make, lifestyle changes that have also been helpful. Like, cutting out certain food groups has been helpful for me. It's not helpful for everybody. But allowing myself the space and the time to process and find what works for me without the judgment or the shame of like, well, I should be getting better, or like, I should be making this much progress. Like, so just being kind with myself, like going through the process of it all, which sucks because I think people listening are just like, what's the one thing I can do to like make this success,
Don't do it.
right? It doesn't exist, right? Like there's no magic bullet, and being okay with the fact that like it's just a process.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Something I read about in the book is like, we are all so socialized into the hero's journey of this the sense that there is an external bad or external evil and in life, and that this is the narrative of like all great stories in life. And when you have a big illness, like you too want to slay the dragon, which is your illness. And so you start going about it in all these ways. I'm going to slay the dragon by, changing my diet like extremely radically, or I'm going to slay the dragon by doing this like super, super extreme treatment for Lyme disease, or whatever it is. There's like a million ways that this manifests, or with positive thoughts or whatever. I'm going to kill illness. And sometimes for some people that does do the trick, and that's fantastic. But for the vast majority of people with these chronic illnesses, in particular, these illnesses that are so poorly understood, and there aren't, magic bullets for any of them, you go on, and you just fail and fail and fail and fail. And that you start to become the failed hero, which is just a terrible narrative to have in your own mind. And so when I was looking at this, because I was thinking about how to write about it in the book, I was like, well, hold on, like, is there a heroine's journey? And at first I was like, yeah, it's when women have a sword and they also go out to slay the dragon of illness. And that's what I thought for a while. And then I started doing this real deep research into this. It's like, no. It's just like the hero's journey, where this story exists in all cultures, in all ages, in all times, but it's a totally different story. It's the story of the descent into the underworld, into hell. And it's Persephone's story or Inanna's story, and it shows up everywhere. And it is, just as you were saying, it's the trauma of all of it, all the bad things of becoming sick. And, it's not pretty. It's not an adventure. But then the things that are strengthening and are important are also things in the darkness, just as you were saying, the embracing of grief and anger and all of the ugliness and all of the emotions, and the understanding that it may be with you for life, which is extremely difficult to come to terms with. But in order to stop making yourself crazy, you do have to come to some sort of acceptance of that sort of darker fact of your life. And then another part of the heroine's journey is, in Persephone's story, she's this goddess that gets, brought forcibly into the underworld and blah, blah, blah. At the end of it, she eats the pomegranate and she goes back to the upper world, but she has to return every year to the underworld for part of the year. And she becomes this cyclical goddess. And to me, that is so much of what being chronically ill is about, is going through these cycles and being above ground sometimes, but then descending back into the darkness other times to reevaluate, like, okay, what am I doing? What's helpful? What's sustaining? What isn't? Letting go of some things, and trying to strengthen yourself in that way. And then often that does allow you to become a little bit stronger again, come back up to the upper world, have some time in the sunlight, doing a little bit better. But it's going to be this ongoing process, as you said, forever perhaps, and that's completely okay, and that allows you to take the wisdom of all these things that have been sold as miracle cures and incorporate them without them having to be the silver bullet, and without them having to be the one thing that slays illness forever and ever and ever. Amen. And so to me, like, just sort of switching those narratives was like so important. It's so helpful to just be a queen of the dead instead of, Frodo, like to be this person and also in all the stories, they also become the person, which is true, I think, for everybody on this call right now. They become the person that guides other souls through the underworld, which is another hugely important part of like kind of what happens to you. It's like part of the meaning of all of this. It's like, well, for all the bad stuff, you do become this person who can see in the dark and who can help other people as they begin their initial descent, which is so scary and so disorienting, and to take them by the hand and to start to lead them through these, the fires and the darkness and all of this horrible stuff. And that is so important. And that's like the other great story of life, because there's so much trauma in life and we have to have a story for that. So to me, this is that. And I feel like that's you guys. When I listen to you guys tell your stories, I'm like, right, heroines. Like that's
so beautiful, Sarah. Oh my gosh.
That's
Love
so
that.
beautiful. I also love the Lord of the Rings reference, not going to lie. But yeah, we're coming to the end of the interview, so I just want to ask one last thing. And what is something that you would say to a listener who might currently be struggling with their own mysterious or misunderstood illness? Like, what is the advice you give to that man or woman?
First and foremost, I believe you. I believe that you are suffering and that you're struggling. And I'm sorry that you're going through this. Please know that you're not alone. And please know that there are people that understand what you're going through. And there are healthcare providers that want to help you. So please don't stop looking for them, and don't stop looking for your support and your tribe. And your life can get better. Like it doesn't have to be this way forever, and it won't be this way forever. Just dig deep and really find that strength to keep advocating for yourself right now, and don't stop fighting for yourself, because you deserve to keep pushing, and you deserve to have answers, and you deserve to have peace in your life.
1000%. That's what I would say as well. And, I would also just say that, you are right. You may not know your diagnosis, but you know that your symptoms are real. They're not imagined. They're real. And what I would encourage anybody to do is to make a pact between themselves and themselves to not leave yourself, to not divorce yourself in all of this, because there's going to be so much pressure to not know what you know, to not believe what your body is telling you, to constantly sign on to somebody else's understanding that does not comport with what you know to be true, just in terms of your sort of basic facts of your own life. And I think one of the most strengthening, important things that you can do is to create an alliance with yourself, and just promise, no matter what else happens, that you are going to be on your side, and that you, as Brianna was saying, are going to continue to advocate for yourself, no matter what anybody says to you, no matter if it's your friends, your family, your doctors, your positive affirmations coach, whatever it is, to, telling you that something you're doing is contrary to what you know to be true about yourself, to just promise to always come back to, I know who I am, I know what is true, and I'm going to continue fighting for myself.
That is so beautiful and such amazing advice from both of you. I'm so honored to have spoken to you both today, and thanks for joining us on the show, for your wisdom and just for your experience and your courage. So thank you both.
Likewise, I am so thrilled to have gotten to speak with you both. You're amazing women, and I'm so grateful for all you do for our chronic illness community. So thank you.
Thank you so much. This is such an honor for me. I'm really happy to be here.
Listeners can learn more about Brianna and Sarah by heading to the episode page on beyondmybattle.org or unfixedfilm.com. The Unfixed podcast is a collaboration between Unfixed Media Productions and Beyond My Battle, a nonprofit helping people reduce the stress of illness and disability. If you want to learn more about the Unfixed documentary, visit unfixedmedia.com or subscribe to the Unfixed Community YouTube channel. As always, if this show or particular episode resonated with you or helped you in some way, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or share it with your friends and family. Each episode is recorded and edited by Starling Studios.